People who have cut family members off from their lives, what was the final straw for you? Story 1. My father is a drug addict and a narcissist. My whole childhood had him rarely playing a significant role, and when I did see him, he had every excuse as to why. As I got a little older, I started to second-guess the context of earlier events and hear him repeat self-serving lies to people that I knew weren't true. Then he started getting incarcerated. Him disappearing for a weekend, or even a week at a time, was one thing, but him spending weeks or months in rehab or prison was a whole different thing. My mother finally kicked him to the curb, and any of the times I bothered to be around him after that, my mother never discouraged a relationship with him or said a bad word about him, despite having more than enough reason to. He always tried to act more like a friend than a parent. One of the last times he got arrested and went to prison was for a period of months. I didn't talk to him for a stretch, and then when I did again, I told him that if he ever touched another drug when we were done, he would no longer be my father or have any place in my life. Fast forward a few years later, and I was just laid off from a job I really enjoyed. I had just walked into my apartment and was basically in tears, knowing I had to tell my roommate that I lost my job and had no idea where my rent was going to come from in 10 days. Then I got a phone call from my sister to say that Butt Hat had gotten arrested and was going away for 7 years. He had let me down my whole life. He had made his addiction everyone else's fault. He badmouthed his friends, his family, my mother, her family, everybody. He missed every memorable and important event from my childhood. He never paid a cent of child support, so I grew up poor with a single mother trying to pay for herself and 3 kids. He even, at least once, took some of my stuff and sold it, presumably for drug money. I had overlooked, or at least accepted all of that. But that news and that gut punch of disappointment on what was already a very bad day was just too much. I told her I didn't care, and to let him know not to contact me if and when he got out. Unfortunately, he did eventually get out. I sincerely hoped he would just die in prison so he could stop hurting and disappointing my siblings, and has since gotten all kinds of people to feel sorry for him through a mix of his annoyingly effective charisma and also an abundance of lies. But I've held firm in not saying a word to him. He's tried sending me letters, and everyone was tossed in a bonfire unopened. He's tried having relatives pass me messages from him, but I informed them quickly that anyone acting as his mouthpiece will get cut from my life as well. And honestly, it feels great. People always say dumb stuff like, but he's still your father. You only get one, or you should forgive him for your own sake. But that's all horse manure. The thing I did for my sake was remove the toxic person. It was 100% the right move, and my only regret is that I didn't do it much sooner and save some of the extra heartache. And yeah, you do only get one father. You also only get one gallbladder. And if it starts to become toxic and dangerous to your health, they cut that stuff out of your body so you can continue living a healthy and happy life. So the moral of the story, don't wait to cut out poopy, toxic people. Do it and don't regret it because you deserve to be happy without them. Story 2. My grandmother on my mom's side. Some background info to explain. When I was in preschool, I can distinctly remember every day after my mom dropped me off, the adults that worked there would take me back to a room and strip me down. They were looking for bruises, apparently. This was in the 80s. I never questioned it, or anything, till I got older and realized that was strange. In first grade, my grandmother and grandfather picked me up from school. This was strange since they lived in Iowa and I was in Mississippi, and put me in their RV for a joyride, which turned out to go on until dark. I remember her telling me to know that she loves me, and that she's doing this because I deserve better. Again, I did not understand what was going on. I was just excited to be in an RV and not in school. By dark, we pulled into a parking lot, and my mom and dad pulled me from the RV, put me in the back seat, and then talked to them. By talk, I remember yelling and such. There are a lot lesser things she did, but those two stand out the most. I didn't find out anything about why these things happened until after my grandfather died, and I asked why we weren't going to the funeral. The grandfather wasn't my mom's dad. He was husband number 6, I believe. My mom explained to me that my grandmother hated her for divorcing a doctor and then getting married to a man and living in dirty Mississippi. She felt my mom's horrible decision to do this meant that, in my grandmother's eyes, my mom was not fit to take care of me and that she could do better. Apparently, the reason for what they did to me in preschool was because my grandmother had called them and told them my mother was abusing me. So they were looking for evidence, I guess. I have no idea how my parents were able to get me back from the grandparents and have no way of really finding out all the details, since my mom passed away last year and my dad has and still is having cluster strokes, so his memory and speech patterns are not reliable. Story 3. The last year of my mother-in-law's life, my mother was jealous and hateful of the attention we were giving my husband's super sweet mom. My mom was going to move the day after Christmas, even though we told her we can't help because both of us have jobs, that the week between Christmas and New Year is particularly crucial in getting things set up. Well, she had a car accident on Christmas Eve and still wanted to move in 2 days, despite her broken ribs. When we told her she should postpone until we could help, she screamed and called us selfish and hateful, including my husband, who is neither. Christmas Day, she made our house full of guests uncomfortable because she was mad and fuming. She had spoiled every Christmas in my life, but this was the last straw for my husband, and he said she would not be welcome on Christmas Day anymore. We've been married 30-something years, and he's been my side with her for all of it. But losing his mom, and anyway, he reached the point he was just done. I told her I'd still help her, but wouldn't be socializing anymore. One afternoon, she asked why, and I told her I just can't hear my mother call me names anymore. Selfish, uncaring, heartless, cruel, and her reply, well, that comes from a place of hurt. Had she said something like, I say things I don't mean when I'm upset, then we would have probably continued limping along. Anyway, my brother and family were coming in, and I was going to host Christmas dinner on 12/22 when they were in town. But her snitty text just before Thanksgiving was if she's going to be alone on Christmas, she might as well be alone on Thanksgiving also. Normally that would have sent me in olive branch mode, but instead I just sent back, okay, and never saw her again, except for once that was somewhat accidental. Not that she didn't try re-engaging over the coming years, she did a lot, but I never could. She passed away this year. Story 4. My son got his back sliced when he fell off a landscaping wall in the backyard and found out they didn't watch him at all. So he sat in their backyard crying, freaking out, and bleeding until they brought him back to our house. Didn't even notice or care that something was wrong with him. They just dropped him off. I immediately helped my son with medicine and bandaged him up, left him to my wife to care for, then went to my parents' house to show what had happened with pictures and yell at them. They denied any fault for what happened and tried to say he was like that before he came over. I told them they're not allowed to see my kids unless it's at my house when I allow them to be there. They were all up in arms about that, saying I'm using the kids against them and trying to manipulate them, to which I responded, I don't trust you with my kids. You neglected them, and one got severely hurt. There will not be a next time, as there shouldn't have been this time. I'm not using them, I'm advocating for them, and I'm not letting them stay in the care of people who let one be injured, crying and bleeding alone, with no one to care for him. I'm not being manipulative, you're being neglectful and entitled, and if you don't see a problem with your actions, then I'm not interested in having you in our lives anymore. Haven't talked since. Story 5. I cut my uncle out of my life the day my gran died. She had terminal lung cancer, and the last 3 months of her life she lived out in complete agony. My mother and I moved in with her to care for her full-time. I was only 18, working and still in full-time education. It took so much out of me. My uncle didn't offer us a hand once, and when we asked him for help, he was essentially like, ew, no, she smells like pee-pee. In the days leading up to her death, when she was pretty much a vegetable, he finally came round to discuss how her money was going to be handled, demanding he was entitled to more than us because he was the eldest. Despite the fact that he was incredibly well off, didn't do anything to help my gran while she was dying, and the fact my mother and I were essentially living in poverty at the time. All he cared about was her money. It's been 2 years since she passed away, and all that stuff is still being sorted out. But I refuse to talk to him now. I hate him. He's such a heartless pig that couldn't even be upset about his mother passing away because he was so excited at the prospect of receiving money. Story 6. I had been in the hospital for over a month, nearly passing away from a rare disorder. My dad had come and spent time with me almost every day. Where was my mom? Not even a phone call. When I finally got out and was at home, I called her to update her on what had been going on with me, and she dominated the conversation. She somehow made the entire situation about her and how worried she was, what she would have done if that happened to her, etc. My 2-year-old ran up to me and was hugging my leg, and as I looked down into the eye of my baby, I realized I couldn't even imagine if my baby had just gone through what I did, not visiting, not talking, and making every conversation about me. That was pretty much the last time I ever talked to my mom. My sister had already cut my mom from her life, and that moment was when it dawned on me my mom really didn't care about us. She doesn't actually love us. A loving mother would never have treated their children the way that woman treated us. Story 7. Years and years of being told I never do anything right by my mother. Some of the highlights: scored 99% on a test and got told I was stupid for forgetting a dollar sign on a currency equation. Made county finals for wrestling, got dropped off and asked how long before she had to be back, because I'd rather go shopping than stay. Qualified as a team alternate for the national championships and had to turn it down because your father and I have plans and I'm not canceling. My sister was stealing packs of cigarettes for her friends, and I took the blame and beating despite none of my friends being smokers or drinkers, since we were all doing high-level sports. My son was born, and she got mad that my wife breastfed because it meant she couldn't bottle feed him. I took the abuse on that one too because I didn't intervene and stop it. That last one did it for me. He's 8 now and has no idea she exists. It's been almost 7 years. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 8. Sister caused issues out of thin air, and then when challenged about it, she lied through her teeth and tried to get family on the side of her. She had then done this on 2 occasions with a girlfriend I recently split up with because of these reasons. She failed miserably as she was found out, but it still cost me a good relationship. It's one thing causing drama, but to cause me drama and interfere in my relationship just hammers the nail in the coffin for me. It makes it worse that she openly admitted to me that part of the reason she caused an issue is because I wasn't speaking to her. So my thoughts were that it was the dumbest thing you can do to build a relationship with someone. It's the exact opposite of building bridges. Story 9. My aunt and uncle threw out their daughter for coming out as gay at 14. I took her in and got a lawyer to get custody of her for me ASAP, because I didn't trust my uncle one bit and figured he'd remember he could force her to a conversion therapy camp if he still had custody. He tried, but thankfully after I had custody and could throw him off my property and get him arrested for trying to drag her out of my home, his 2 sons are also on my hit list for trying to sneak onto my property to rescue her. I've flat out told them that if I see them on my property again, I'm shooting them. That part of the family doesn't come to Christmas dinner with Grandma anymore. Story 10. When I was 9, my mom told me that she had wanted an abortion with me, but they weren't readily available in 1959, so I was lucky. Over the years, it was on and off with her. I'd swear her out of my life and then let her back in. I was blamed for everything that was wrong in her life and everyone else's. When I was in my 50s, she screamed at me on the phone and repeated more than once that she hated me. I told her she wanted an abortion in 1959, and congratulations, you just received your abortion. I will now allow a text here and there, but we don't speak, and I'm totally fine with the situation. Story 11. Some of my cousins because they lied to my mother regarding a musical instrument of mine that they decided to steal. The truth of the matter is, if they asked, I would have sold it to them pretty cheap. But lying and taking it without my permission is the kicker. The sad thing is that I'm one of the few family members that was on their side, or at least would hear them out, as they're considered black sheep of the family by other family members and looked down upon. They essentially burned their last bridge within our family. I've still yet to receive an apology 5 years later. Story 12. Technically, my mom did the cutting off part, but when I was little, my dad kidnapped me and my siblings abroad just to get back at my mom. The mastermind behind it all was his poop of a mother. I know people throw this word around, but she truly was a psychopath. Me and my siblings spend about a year in a house with that witch being constantly psychologically and physically abused by her, as my dad drank himself into a coma. My mom eventually got us back, and we have never spoken to them since. Sometimes I wonder if she's dead and think about defacing her grave and peeing on it. Story 13. I haven't cut off contact with my family, but we don't talk as much anymore. I've always been the black sheep of the family. You realize they just don't like you when you're around by the way they speak to you. My family is very condescending towards my decisions and way of thinking. Everything I do is wrong in their eyes, and they themselves can do no wrong. Sometimes you just have to realize you will never win over people, even if they're family. It's better to leave in those situations if you find your mental health is far healthier when they're not around. Story 14. My dad stopped talking to me because he found some poop I wrote 40 years ago when I was 10 and was ticked off that he abandoned me and my sister. He had come back right around that time, so it wasn't much. I was into spies and covert stuff, so who knows what it was about. He finds it 40 years later, waits until I come over on Father's Day, and gets ticked off in front of me and my kids. Yeah, I haven't bothered to contact him again, though I was very careful not to angrily say anything I'll regret. I'm so tired of having to be an adult with my parents. Story 15. She's an addict. No amount of love and support from us is going to change that. She has to change by herself, and right now she doesn't seem to be able to do that. She's lied to us, stolen from us, lied to us some more, and now there's no trust left. She's the only person that I've banned from my home. The final straw was her coming to the house with a friend, both of them obviously under the influence, and she kept going to the bathroom looking for medication that we were hiding from the last time she stole pain medication. Story 16. My dad was a deadbeat and just an all-around sack of poop. My mother single-handedly raised me while my divorced dad did his own thing. He never paid child support. He often forgets when my birthday is or how old I am. He came to my graduation, that was it. I lost it. The thing is, he wasn't even there of his own accord. My grandmother made him go, and he still took credit for shaping me into a young man. To this day, why my mother married him in the first place is a question I can't seem to figure out. Story 17. I cut off everyone except one sibling when I turned 18. I already knew I wanted to do this by the time I was 16. Mom is a very mentally ill drug addict, and father was a sociopathic pervert. Cut off the rest because I knew they would leak details of my life to said parents. Don't know if they died, and I don't care. My life has been very peaceful ever since. You know when people say they wish they could be a kid again? I would never want that. The power and autonomy I have over myself as an adult is invaluable. Story 18. The final straw of cutting off my father was blaming my mom for his repeated decision to cheat on her. She shouldn't have had a second job for so long. She had a second job because of his spending habits. She was such a witch. She didn't like that he would be full on gawking at women while they were out. She's so vain. She was insecure because he kept gawking at other women all the time. Don't blame innocent people for your own stupid decisions. Story 19. I cut my brother out of my life multiple times, but the absolute final straw was when my parents gave him a last chance to put his life together, and for 6 months he did good. Then his past caught up with him, and rather than face the music, he stole a car from my mom and disappeared. He reappeared in a completely different state a year later, but at that point, no one was accepting his calls. Then he did some bad stuff and is now in prison. Story 20. Loaning them $40,000, which I had to borrow, to prevent foreclosure of the family farm, after they begged me for months, only to have them pretend it was a gift and make me hire an attorney to get the money back. To make it worse, they even accused me of forging documents to show it was a loan, trying to ruin my name in the process. Fortunately, they had paid for 4 years, and that was what saved me. Story 21. When my brother finally admitted to molesting my sister and I growing up, and my mother and younger brother picked him and literally blocked me and told every single person in my bloodline that I was trash, so they all blocked me too. Also, it wouldn't get out, so they wouldn't know the truth. Like I was about to take a billboard out or something. R.I.P. I'm an orphan now. Story 22. The final straw was a fist fight with stepmom and stepbrothers all at once. Stepmom said I wasn't welcome to the house anymore. Dad favored his new family over me. He said he'd make an agreement with my mom to skip weekends visits for no child support. I was 16 and I haven't seen, heard from, or spoken to him in 29 years. Still don't care to know if he's alive or unalive. Story 23. When my father took a phone call from me, I asked him to please be alone. I poured out my heart and soul for 9 minutes. Tears, sobs, tragedy, everything. I hung up and he texted me a few minutes later, saying he had put me on speakerphone and the whole family had heard everything. I responded that it was the last thing they would ever hear of me. Story 24. I cut my family off when they continuously invited my ex to family gatherings and so on, despite the fact that the relationship had ended 3 years prior to myself and my SO having our daughter, who is now 10 years old. My family have never met her and have made no attempt to try either. Story 25. My father told me he would prefer me to be the dying and the most miserable person on earth as long as I was religious rather than being happy, successful, and myself. My mother just sat there and nodded in agreement. I grabbed all my stuff and left that night. Story 26. My nephew, who was raised more or less as my little brother, stole my deceased father's coin collection from my mother. put it in a Coinstar machine, and used the money he got to score heroin. Haven't spoken to him since. I can't. Story 27. The night before we thought my son was going to pass away, removal of ventilator, and expected him to pass shortly after. My dad told me how awful of a mother I was. Never talked to him again. It's been 8 years. Story 28. Overheard her planning to sabotage my vehicle and set me up to get fired from a job so I would be forced to stay under her roof longer and pay her bills and do all the chores. Screw you, Mom. Story 29. My mom texted my husband behind my back and tried to screw him. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.